one of them, if I counted correctly. Okay, I'm going to look at your
Yeah, but you're going to have to, I mean, our microphone is good, so you're going to have to stand by and
Right.
for him to hear.
And I'm just
You
wondering.
can't walk away from him.
It may be easier for me to be up here and back there. That's fine. I'll work on the time. Oh, yeah.
You might want to start rolling. Just have him power off. Okay, fine.
All right. The Summit County Court of Common Pleas is now in session. The Honorable Allison McCarty presiding.
Thank you. You may be seated, and go ahead and have a seat, Dr. Fagan, so we can see your face. All right. And then just want to wish everyone good morning, and thank also Judge Tammy O'Brien for allowing us to use her courtroom with the technology. And the defense is now ready to call its next witness. Oh, I'm sorry, he's right out there. Probably saw the jury walk in. Pardon? I can yeah, zoom out. Feedback issue. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
Listing, I have to swear him in, but you just have to say who you're calling.
We call Dr. John Fabian.
You may stay seated, doctor, but would you raise your right hand? You swear the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I swear.
All right, thank you. Consider yourself under oath.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Fabian, please give us your name and spell your last name for the court reporter.
Yes, John Matthew Fabian, Fabian.
And what do you do for a living?
I work as a forensic psychologist and a neuropsychologist.
And are you licensed psychologist in the state of Ohio?
Yes.
Are you licensed in any other states?
Yes. Illinois, New York, Texas. I've been licensed in Florida and Minnesota as well.
Dr. Fabian, you practice as a psychologist, but in looking at your report more specifically as a forensic psychologist and a forensic neuropsychologist, can you explain to the jury what that means?
Yes, I evaluate psychological issues in legal proceedings. So these evaluations address a number of legal questions that the court or the attorneys may have, such as whether a defendant is competent to stand trial, whether they're not guilty by reason of insanity. This case is relevant to potential mitigating factors that the jury may consider in his capital sentencing hearing. So essentially I will evaluate a defendant for a legal situation and apply the psychology, which is really the assessment of mental disorder, to a particular legal question and potentially offer expert witness testimony.
And can you tell us about your academic history and the various degrees you have?
Yeah, sure. So I have a Bachelor of Arts in Clinical Science and Psychology from the University of Cincinnati. I have a Master's degree in General Psychology from the University of Cincinnati. I have a Master's degree in Clinical Psychology and a Doctorate in Clinical Psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. I have a Juris Doctorate in Law from Cleveland Marshall College of Law. I have postdoctorate certification in Clinical Neuropsychology from the Fielding Institute in Santa Barbara, California, and a 2-year postdoctorate degree from a fellowship training at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine and Albuquerque VA Hospital in Clinical Neuropsychology.
Now you said you have a law degree. Are you a practicing attorney?
No, I'm not.
Why did you go to law school?
I went to law school, so I knew I wanted to work in the field of forensic psychology, and it's heavily law-based or legal-based. I went at night when I was a director of a court psychiatric clinic in Ohio. I have also published in the area of forensic psychology, psychiatry, and the law. And I took classes through Case Western Reserve School of Law in mental health, psychiatry, and law as well. So I wanted to kind of blend my education.
Are you board certified in any areas of psychology?
Yes, I'm board certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology in clinical psychology and forensic psychology. So I had to essentially do a lot of, coursework and testing and oral examinations with other board-certified psychologists in those respective fields of clinical psychology and forensic psychology.
So your knowledge in the United States, what percentage of psychologists are board certified in one area of psychology?
I'd probably say it's under 5%.
And as far as being board certified in two areas, like yourself?
It'd be less than 1%.
Okay. By becoming board certified in those areas, you can't go any higher than board certification, correct?
Right, correct.
Have you had academic appointments?
Yes, I've taught at Cleveland State University psychology, taught classes in the psychology of violence as well as forensic psychology and law. I've taught intellectual assessment at Case Western Reserve University in the Department of Psychology.
And are you on the editorial, any editorial boards in your field?
Yes, I've basically served as an editorial board member for this Journal of Psychology, Injury, and Law, the Journal of Forensic Psychology Practice, the Journal of Aggression and Violent Behavior, and I've been a reviewer, book reviewer for the Forensic Psychology Unbound, and I'm a legal section editor for that journal as well. And then I served as a guest editor at about 10 other journals in the fields of psychology, psychiatry, and law.
And do some of your publications have to do with capital punishment, the death penalty?
They do, yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your work experience that lead you to this position.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Grevin?
Yes. Can you hear? Yes, we can all hear you.
Yes. Okay, great. I basically started out at Cook County Jail and graduate school, so I really learned mental illness through a correctional population, and that's basically probably the largest jail or the second largest jail in the country. So I learned how to do IQ assessment, personality testing. I learned what schizophrenia and mental illness. I spent time there at Cook County Jail in their assessment training program, and then I was at the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Chicago, and I did more therapy and treatment with federal defendants. I came back to Ohio and basically worked in a number of court psychiatric clinics. So in Ohio, there's probably about 10 court psychiatric clinics in the state. Cleveland, Columbus, Akron, etc. And there I worked in Toledo for the Northwest Ohio, and I was the psychology intern, the forensic psychology intern. And I evaluated defendants for pretrial issues such as competency or insanity, and then mitigation type evaluations and risk assessments, and basically providing the judge or courts information about a particular defendant that was in front of them. I was director of the Court Psychiatric Clinic in Lake County, Ohio, and also worked at the Forensic Psychiatric Center of Northeast Ohio, covering areas such as Youngstown, Trumbull County, and providing the same types of forensic services, both pre-trial, before trial, and pre-sentence psychological evaluations. I worked at Minnesota's maximum security forensic hospital, so in that state they basically have one facility rather than a lot of different court psychiatric clinics. And there I did the same types of work and worked heavily within the risk assessment unit to, I guess, evaluate individuals to whether they should be released from the hospital. I did a 2-year fellowship in clinical neuropsychology through the medical school in New Mexico and the VA there. So there I saw clinical patients and evaluated them for issues such as brain injury, seizure, Alzheimer's, dementia, stroke, different types of neurological disorders that may affect one's brain functioning. Similarly, in Cleveland, I I had some clinical consulting positions where I worked at the Neurology and Neuroscience Association in Akron, working with some of the adult patients with different neurological disorders, as well as Applewood Psychiatric Center in Cleveland, where I was working with high-risk youth, evaluating psychological and neuropsychological examinations with children, I'd say, between 8 and 17. I was consultant at the Juvenile Court Psychiatric Clinic in Cleveland, off and on for about 13 years, and they're providing examinations for juvenile court. So that kind of brings you up to date. Now I do a lot of different forensic, psychological, and neuropsychological evaluations in a number of different states for different types of legal issues.
So as either a court psychologist or a court-appointed psychologist or as an expert witness, approximately how many people have you evaluated?
I would say no more than 3,500.
Have you previously testified as an expert in other legal proceedings?
Yes, I have.
Do you know in how many different counties in Ohio?
I would say over 10.
And have you testified as an expert witness in courts in other states?
Yes.
Approximately how many?
I'd say Nevada, Illinois, Arizona, Arkansas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Alabama, Iowa, New York, Minnesota, and Florida.
Approximately how many times have you testified as an expert witness? About?
Over 150.
I'm sorry?
Over 150 times.
Okay. And how many individuals charged with either murder or aggravated murder have you evaluated?
Close to 400.
And how many defendants charged with capital murder? How many of those cases have you been involved in?
I'd say close to 250.
Okay. Now, have you, in the past, have you examined defendants on behalf of both the prosecutor, the defendant, or the court itself?
I have, yes.
Okay. Do you get paid for your work, doctor?
I do.
What is your typical hourly rate?
It ranges. I think the court here was paying me $200 per hour. Usually it's about $275 per hour. It depends.
Okay, so you're working at a little bit of a reduced rate in this case. Is that fair?
I don't mind, Your Honor.
Now, let me ask you this question, doctor.
Yes.
Are you here as an advocate for Kenan?
No, absolutely not.
What do you believe your role is as an expert witness?
Well, it's to provide some insight for the trier of fact, which is a jury, as to Kenan Ivery, perhaps some of psychological makeup, how he functions, potentially mitigating factors along those lines that they have to consider, that they may or may not find as mitigating in nature when they consider, I guess their sentencing deliberation.
Now, are you here today to offer any excuses or justifications for Kenan's actions on November 16th?
No, that's not my objective at all.
Tell the jury how you first become involved, I guess, typically in a case, or in this case with Mr. Ivery.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Grevin, you had contacted me about this case and requested, my involvement as a, mental health expert to examine Mr. Ivery. And the issue was, hey, this is a capital case, and we needed some examination as to potential mitigating factors.
So it's fair to say that mitigation is a defense-driven referral, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So, my objective is to evaluate any potential issues that I guess I may think could be a mitigating factor. You, the defense team, you and I may, discuss some of these findings, and then, irate a report and potential provide testimony and talk about some of these issues with the jury.
Now, in this case, did you evaluate Mr. Ivery?
I did.
On how many different occasions?
Yeah, I evaluated him on 3 occasions.
And again, these took place while he was in either the Summit or the Medina County Jail, correct?
Yeah, that is correct, yes.
And did you issue or did you author a report regarding Mr. Ivery?
I did, yes.
Okay. I'm going to mark it as Defendant's Exhibit M. F. No. G. MG. Do you have that report in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please feel free to refer to it when I'm talking to you, okay?
Yeah, sure, thank you.
What did you learn about Kenan's life?
Well, I know he was from the Akron area. He lived in, the urban area in the West Side. He had a couple brothers. His biological parents were married. I think they've been pretty supportive of him even through these court proceedings. His, parents, were active, I think, in his life. I think, there was, they were involved with his schooling. I have no record of any domestic violence or abuse in the family. I don't think social services was contacted for any type of investigations. I know that his 2 brothers had been both involved with the criminal element or been charged in the past with criminal offenses. I did meet his brother Marlon. He has a history of cerebral palsy, on disability, and I know that a big or a significant theme here is his other brother was murdered, and that has really affected this family, tremendously, and Kenan as well, which we'll talk more about.
Right, we'll get to Henry a little bit later. Go ahead.
Oh, sure, okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off about anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, he grew up in an Akron area, and I think his family, was, somewhat stable, and, he lived in a nuclear type environment. They didn't have all the money in the world, but I think basic necessities were provided for the family.
Did Kenan have any history of any problems at school?
His academic record seemed to be a fair student. I think he was ranked about 63rd of 200 and some. His grade point was a 2+, like a 2.8. I don't really believe he had any history of suspensions, expulsions, truancy. He graduated from high school. So there was, really no evidence of learning disability, special education, behavioral classroom management problems, to my knowledge.
Was there evidence of substance abuse with Kenan?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So when we're looking at that, I think Kenan initially, lacked some insight into, potentially the severity of his substance use disorders. So, I know he has a prior DUI in about 2009, and I later on my report will acknowledge an intoxicated state at the time of this offense. I know he's, used alcohol more heavily on the weekends, but I think, I did some psychological testing as well. He acknowledged, being like kind of an earlier, mild to moderate problem drinker. I think he, has had some evidence of blackouts in the past, drinking excessively to intoxication. Again, he's got 1 DUI, so at times, he's going to have difficulties, potentially, controlling his use, using more over time to get the same effect. I'd say maybe there's some tolerance issues there. So we see some of these symptoms of, let's say, blackouts, DUI, tolerance, that's suggesting an alcohol dependence disorder. He also was a heavy marijuana, cannabis use or user. And I would say that he would smoke, these blunts or, I guess, heavy-duty marijuana cigarettes or joints, and he used pretty consistently. He believed he was able to control his use, but I think a lot of his time and money was spent using, marijuana, so he was often under the influence. And so, ultimately, I've given him a test called the Michigan Alcohol test, and also the personality assessment inventory, and both tests supported substance dependency and mental health issues, and he's a dual diagnosed individual in which he has mental health issues and substance use problems.
And you are aware of his prior convictions for cocaine-related offenses too, correct?
Yes, I am.
Prior to your examination, did Kenan have any history of any prior mental health assessments?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
He had no inpatient psychiatric treatment history, and it's my understanding that he never participated in any type of counseling or individual therapy, and he's never been prescribed any type of psychiatric medication.
Doctor, are you familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, I am.
Tell the jury, I guess, one, what that is, and two, tell the jury what that is.
Sure. So it really was, I would say, invented, based on shell shock syndrome with folks in the military, where they would come back and have significant traumatic experiences, psychologically, emotionally, behaviorally, due to traumatic events being, warfare or, battle time. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's the DSM, we call it, is utilized. It's published by the American Psychiatric Association. It's basically our handbook to diagnose mental disorders. And I have the disorder on my laptop right here, PTSD, and this is from the DSM-5.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yeah.
Before you go any further, you talked about the DSM-5. Tell the people on the jury what that is.
Right. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is essentially like your criminal law code book is probably on the table over there. It basically outlines different diagnoses such as schizophrenia, substance dependency, bipolar disorder, and different symptoms and behaviors that make up such a disorder. So it's published by the American Psychiatric Association, and we use it in all of our assessments, whether you're at a VA or a counseling center or a state hospital or in a forensic case like this. So it's basically a guideline.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's a guideline of symptoms. Yeah, the guideline of symptoms that make up different psychiatric disorders.
And that book is relied on psychologists all across the country or all across the world?
All across the country and world. It was published about 2 years ago.
Okay. And I cut you off a little bit when you were talking about the post-traumatic stress disorder. We were talking about it originally started out as shell shock with some of our vets coming home. Continue from there.
Yeah, so, basically, there's criteria. With PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that means there's been a trauma, and post or after the trauma, you've got stress and symptoms of stress. And so the person has to experience a traumatic event, so it could be exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence, something that is stressful. And you can directly experience it, witness it, or learn it from others, okay? And we'll get into that in regards to its relevance of Kenan. And, so you can experience it, witness it, or learn about it. So you don't have to be there and actually see something traumatic happen. And then there's a number of, psychological and emotional symptoms that follow. So there's there's presence of what we call intrusion symptoms, and those would be something that intrude on your psychological well-being. And that would be like distressing dreams or memories, nightmares, flashbacks of the particular events or things similar to those events, okay? And then you're also going to have evidence of potential dissociative reactions where you will kind of lose your mind in space, where you'll just kind of dissociate and get out of your reality for a minute, and then you need to be kind of snapped back in, and you kind of fade away based potentially in thoughts of kind of a daydream of the prior trauma. And then there's evidence of psychological distress and exposure of, let's say, people, places, and things that may be reminiscent or a reminder of the trauma. So a Vietnam veteran may not want to go to the local, Akron City parade with all these fireworks and, kind of, loud noises and groups of people. Okay, it may bring them back. So, which links to like the avoidance of stimuli associated with these prior traumatic events. So individuals with PTSD often want to kind of avoid, potential areas of stress. Then there's going to be some what we call negative alterations or changes in thinking and mood that may be associated with traumatic events. So they may have problems with trusting other people, believing the world is dangerous, I am bad, I'm worthless, blaming themselves, conceiving or perceiving the world as in a dangerous place. Distortions of thinking about the cause or consequences of the traumatic events, blaming the wrong people, blaming themselves, and then negative emotional states, and that's going to be related to fear, horror, anger, shame, guilt, where after the traumatic events, they're going to have some type of emotional dysfunction. Further, there's evidence as another symptom of lessened interest or participation in activities, feelings of emotional detachment, and problems experiencing positive emotions such as love, care about someone. Sometimes they may think that they have a foreshortened future. Things are not going to go well. Maybe a thought or perception of impending doom. And then finally, there's a marked alteration in arousal reactivity. So kind of like a central nervous system, like hyperarousal, which may indicate reckless behavior, self-destructive behavior, could be suicide, hypervigilance, where you're constantly on guard, potentially paranoid, and problems with concentration, sleep difficulties, and irritability. So, basically you have a history of trauma experiences, or more than one, and then you've got a lot of psychological, emotional issues following those. And often these folks really don't ever deal with their trauma and process, let it out in therapy, and really be actively involved, so they kind of stuff it, which is not really the healthy thing to do.
How is one diagnosed with this?
I'm sorry?
How does someone get diagnosed with PTSD?
Sure. Well, I conducted an interview with Kenan. I administered him a couple of psychological tests, actually 3. 2 focused on PTSD. So one was on the post-traumatic checklist 5th edition. One was the detailed assessment of post-traumatic stress. And then finally there was the personality assessment inventory. And all of those cover, yes?
You broke up there for about 5 seconds. So what was the last thing that you just said?
Okay. I'm plugging my computer in. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yes. You're talking about you gave him the 3 different tests.
Yeah.
And then you
I gave him Sure. The PTSD checklist for the DSM-5. I gave him the detailed assessment of post-traumatic stress, and I gave him the personality assessment inventory. And all three have, the first two focus primarily on PTSD assessment, and the last one has another scale that assesses it. Did you want me to go through that?
Well, I guess let's do this. As a result of the testing, you made three tests involving post-traumatic stress disorder, correct?
Yeah, I did.
And is it fair to say that some tests were more expansive than other tests?
Yes.
I mean, just purely by the number of questions, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So, for example, I think when we talked, the first test you gave him had approximately how many questions?
About 17 questions.
And then the final test you gave him regarding post-traumatic stress disorder had how many questions?
About 105 questions.
Okay. Now, you mentioned before, you used the phrase dual diagnosis. Tell the people on the jury, what does that mean?
So a dual diagnosis means you have two diagnoses, and we really look at, substance use disorders and mental illness. And so really a mentally ill substance abuser. So the individual has co-occurring issues related to mental health and alcohol or drug addiction or dependence.
So is it fairly common for people with post-traumatic stress disorder to also have a concurrent diagnosis of some type of substance abuse?
Yeah, I'd say in men it's about 50%, that's 50, about half of folks that have PTSD are going to have some type of co-occurring substance use disorder.
And when that does happen, why does that happen?
Well, it's the person has often limited coping skills, and they've been through trauma, and sometimes heavy or pervasive trauma or multiple traumatic events. And, they may not have the resources to get help, or they may just avoid their issues, which is obviously, a symptom of PTSD. And, alcohol and drugs kind of allows you, to stuff your issues and not really deal with them, kind of mask your feelings. And, it's a very common coping mechanism.
Okay. Now, let's talk about your diagnosis, Mr. Ivery, and the crime that he was convicted of committing, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Now, that last week or the week before, Kenan was convicted of aggravated murder, correct?
Right.
And explain to the jury your diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, let me do it this way. Tell me what you diagnosed based on your dealings with him. Tell me the diagnoses that you gave Kenan.
Okay. So I gave Kenan a diagnosis of PTSD. I gave him diagnosis of other specified personality disorder with antisocial traits. I gave him cannabis use disorder and alcohol use disorder diagnoses.
And you saw the videotape, correct? I'm sorry, you saw the videotape of the incident that happened on November 17th, correct?
I did.
And you reviewed that with Mr. Ivery, correct?
I did.
Explain to the jury how your diagnoses of Mr. Ivery can be related to the incident that happened on the 17th as far as the purposes that we're here today.
This may be long-winded.
Well,
It's a complicated question. But,
absolutely.
I will, okay, all right. So, you know, we're looking at a complicated individual, okay, and we're looking at a lot of different issues that have been chronic, okay, meaning history of traumatic events, substance abuse. He's been involved with the law. And then we've got like an acute moment of chaos, all right? And we're trying to kind of then describe how this happened at that moment. And I know that the attorneys had a disagreement as maybe what went on at that moment, but maybe I can shed light into his psyche.
Thank you.
So, with that said, it's my opinion that, you know, the traumatic stressors that he went through were his brother being murdered, and he told me he did see his brother's dead body. I'm sure he was also at the funeral. And then he reported having some other traumatic events, and his brother Marlon acknowledged these, where in 2005, he said he was a victim of a robbery, basically sitting in a car and someone knocked on the window and they had a gun outside the window and pointed at him. In 2006, he was coming out of a friend's house. The guys jumped him, he stumbled, fell in the street. He was scared and put a gun to his head and went through his pockets. 2011, he said he was a victim, witness to a home invasion where he's living in a house and some robbers, as you call them, came in. A woman knocked on the door and guys rushed in the house, put a gun to his head and robbed him. And so, you know, these traumatic events, you know, they do have a shaping and molding effect on someone, okay? So these are traumatic events that would qualify for that basically first prong of DSM, PTSD, all right? Now, it's my opinion that the interview and testing also indicated that he had, you know, some intrusive memories. So, this, you know, he doesn't think about this every second, but he has memories of these instances, and he's had nightmares by reports, probably not flashbacks or daydreams of these traumatic events. He reports what we call peri-traumatic dissociation reactions, and what that means is at the time of these events, he kind of spaced out, all right? May have felt fear, horror, and other emotions during these kind of times. And then it's my opinion that he's really never processed these issues. He's never gone to therapy. You know, it was hard for me to kind of get into this stuff with him. He was, you know, very focused in my evaluation on, you know, the first phase of this trial. And he was very focused on, you know, what's going to happen to you in court, and the nature of this, you know, chaotic, offense and incident. And, you know, he never really, in my opinion, dealt with any of these issues, and that's not uncommon. You know, it was folks in an urban environment that may not have the resources or emphasize, you know, mental health. And then, you know, there's some evidence of negative alterations in thinking, mood, let's say. And that's going to be, you know, he has difficulties with trust. He's going to perceive the world in some ways as hostile, dangerous.
Hang on one second.
Yes.
When you said that he's going to perceive the world as hostile or dangerous, is that directly related to his diagnosis of PTSD?
The DSM, PTSD.
I'm sorry, you broke out.
So, you know, and I evaluate these people. I don't come from that type of environment. So, you know, individuals that I see like this all over the country, they're going to have more likelihood of having a gun in their hands, okay? Because they may have been shot at, their friend was murdered, their brother was murdered, you know, so, you know, that's their lifestyle. And then there's like negative emotional states, and that's anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. That came out, you know, I think Kenan comes across as as a bit kind of grandiose and smug, but underneath it, he has a very low self-esteem. Okay, he has feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt. He feels like a failure. And then, he has difficulties with, I think, some emotional connection with people, so he kind of avoids people in many ways. And then finally, there's this heightened arousal. So we call it like fight or flight in moments of stress that are threatening. And the more times you have these moments of stress and threatening stress, you're more likely going to be involved in reckless behaviors. You're going to be quick to be irritable, hypervigilant, on guard, and that may be related, as this criteria says, irritable behavior, angry outbursts, with little or no provocation, typically expressed as verbal or physical aggression towards people or objects. So it's kind of a misperception of threat sometimes, and if you've been through this, you may be armed and misperceive a situation. The alcohol intoxication also is going to affect your judgment, your processing. Okay, so we throw in another diagnosis here. Okay, so he has a chronic alcohol use disorder over the years, DUI, problems controlling his use. But at that moment, that's an acute intoxicated state. Okay, so alcohol is going to affect your judgment. It's going to affect your reasoning, your processing, your reaction, and it's not a good combination when you've been through some of these stressors that are relevant to PTSD. Okay, and then he's not a stranger to the law, and to he has kind of a reckless attitude. He's got evidence of antisocial personality traits, and that's going to be irresponsibility. He should not have had that gun in the bar. He and I talked about that. Okay, and that was a big problem, obviously, in this case. He had a weapon. It was illegal. He's broken the law before, so there is some kind of antisociality issues with breaking the rules and not following the law. So that would be kind of how you conceptualize this, and I can share with you what he told me about this offense. I know he testified, so that's up to you.
No, I mean, like you said, he testified. So I mean, that's
Right.
covered. You understand that it's not your job to decide what is a mitigating factor, correct?
No, that's absolutely correct. Yes.
Your job is to present evidence of potential mitigating factors, correct?
I would agree with that. Yes.
And would you, is it fair to say that your diagnosis and your review of the incident on November 17th, you are presenting that as a potential mitigating factor, correct?
I would agree with that. Yes.
Now, Doctor, you've given a number of opinions today. Is it fair to say that every opinion that you have given has been within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Just hang on 1 second.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify for the record, you were saying November 17th. Was it the 15th into the 16th or the 6th? So it really should be November 16th, just for the record.
Okay.
Okay.
Doctor, you said you do have your report there, correct?
I do.
Look on page 10 of 11.
Yes.
Do me a favor and read the last sentence. It starts, "It is my opinion." It's about 4 lines up.
It is my opinion, with a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, that mitigating evidence can be considered pertaining to a condition of PTSD due to prior trauma, which may have placed him at risk for a heightened fight versus flight reaction, increased autonomic arousal, irritability, potential misperception of threat, a condition related to increased hostility, fear, and left him at risk for aggression.
And that's basically what you testified to throughout but the one thing I want to focus on, and I'm not sure if we talked about exactly, the phrase potential misperception of threat. Explain to the jury what you mean by that and how that plays a part in Kenan Ivery's actions of that night.
Well, PTSD is really, still hot in this field. It's been traditionally, really recognized to be an emotional, psychological disorder, but there's been a lot of research on how trauma affects the brain. And, they've done just different studies with folks who have PTSD and who then undergo imaging, let's say, other tests. And really, different areas of the brain are really either under or overstimulated. One gets hyper-aroused, and the more traumatic experiences you have, I think the more deactivated that brain neurocircuitry is. And so when people that have been held up or experienced different threats or trauma, they're going to be likely to in some ways expect that to happen again, okay? And they're going to have difficulties, especially within their limbic system of their brain, which focuses on emotional regulation, really regulating themselves. And so they may be at risk for misperceptions. They're going to, kind of react first before processing all the information because they've been hurt or, threatened before, okay? And so that is, an area where, it's a cognitive emotional area of functioning, perceiving what someone else may do. And so at that moment that happens so quickly, he's going to react and perceive and misperceive something more so than the average person will.
Thank you, Doctor. I have no further questions at this time, but the prosecutor's going to have some for you, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Good morning, Dr. Fabian. My name is John Baumel with the Summit County Prosecutor's Office.
Good morning.
And I'm going to ask you some questions in regards to not only your direct testimony, but we also have received a copy of the report that you've issued in this case. So if you need to refer to that report at any time, please feel free to do so.
Okay, sir.
And this report, when I look at the title on the report, it's entitled, among other things, Death Penalty Mitigation Evaluation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
Yes.
we heard about your practice and your history. How long in the course of your career have you been doing evaluations and issuing death penalty mitigation evaluations in your work?
About since 2001.
So for approximately the last 14 years?
Yes.
And how many similar type of reports have you provided in criminal cases, would you estimate, during those 14 years?
I'd say over 100.
How many times, doctor, would you estimate that you've testified in court in these sentencing hearings regarding these evaluations that you've done?
Perhaps 20.
And on direct examination, you indicated that you're paid for your services, correct?
Yes.
You were paid for your services in this case, correct?
Not yet, but I will be, yes.
And you have a website, do you not, that advertises your services? I believe it's...
Yes.
JohnMatthewFabian.com, is that your website?
Yes.
And that advertises your services to clients, potentially defense attorneys who may want to hire you for the things we've talked about today.
I guess anybody who would need a forensic mental health assessment.
And is there a section, and I believe there's a section in your website, in your advertisement, that specifically deals with capital litigation, forensic psychological evaluations. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
And you have kind of a list of objectives. The list is titled Mitigation and Capital Sentencing can serve the following objectives. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a while.
Well, it appears to have 10 listings, and I'm not going to go over them all, but I do want to go over several of them. That one of the objectives that you advertised, listed as number 4, is portrays any positive redeeming qualities the defendant possesses. Is that correct?
The literature has noted that in some publications, yes.
But I guess what I'm asking is you specifically advertise that as one of the services you can provide in the field of capital litigation.
I don't think I'm doing that.
I'm not saying you do. Well, I'm not saying what you are doing. I guess I'm just saying you list that on your website as one of your objectives in these type of cases.
I don't have internet access right now, so I'm not looking. I'll try to get it. I'm not formally advertising to redeem a defendant in a redeemable light. That's not my goal.
Number 5 indicates, quote, explains the defendant's homicidal acts and prior violent criminal behavior in a humanly understandable light, given his past history, unique characteristics affecting his development, and exposure to heightened risk factors and deficits in protective mediating factors. Is that one of the objectives?
I would agree that one of the objectives is to explain a defendant's homicidal behaviors relevant to the risk factors that can be understood by the jury. I wouldn't look for anything other than an understanding of this trial defendant's circumstances. That's what I would kind of focus on.
I mean, would you disagree with your own website indicating that that is done in a humanly understandable light?
Probably not. I mean, it can be humanly understandable. Your argument as to his offenses is humanly understandable, and so is Mr. Grevin's. So,
Number 6, reveals the defendant as a human being, humanizes the defendant, and separates his character and background from his crime. Is that one of your objectives?
I would say that I ditto the literature on mitigation from other people who do it. All I'm trying to do is to present the psychological functioning of this defendant in an understandable light to the jury.
The last objective that I'll point out from your website is number 7. It shows that the defendant's life in prison would be productive and not threatening or violent to others.
If that's the case, and so sometimes I may be consulted with to look at risk assessment of violence or future dangerousness, and I've told different attorneys that I could not help in that respect. Other times we do look at adjustment and whether that individual can adjust in prison as a mitigating factor, yes.
Dr. Fabian, you've written articles that may have been published in various journals in regards to this specific field, is that correct?
Yes.
About how many articles do you believe you've written that have been published, if you know?
Several.
And one, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's called Mitigating Murder at Capital Sentencing, an Empirical and Practical Psycho-Legal Strategy. Is that correct?
Yes.
You testified that you've been in the courts of Summit County before, as well as other courts in Ohio and other states. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there are times, would you agree with me, that judges have not always been pleased with the services you've provided?
Objection.
And you can answer that question.
I guess that there was a concern in Summit County that my report had been late, or I hadn't got information to a judge in a prior capital case as more recently.
You're referring to the Michael Hendon case, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
That was a case in which Judge Corrigo Jones removed you from the case because of your failures?
I testified in his intellectual disability case, but she said that, she didn't explain to me why there was a removal, and she notified that to me when I testified.
Were you also a mitigation specialist or provided an evaluation on the John Drummond case out of Mahoning County?
Yes.
Had you testify in the post-conviction relief hearing?
I guess I testified at the back 10 years before, probably 10 years before, yes.
Did you subsequently testify in a later hearing regarding that same case and regarding your work on that case?
I testified to my recollection of the mitigation investigation years before, and I did not have a recall of everything that was done or not done years before.
Were you aware that the judge ruled that your testimony was suspect, not completely truthful, and was not credible?
Yeah, I think I've seen that, but I thought he was granted another trial because of some of my testimony by the federal appellate court.
In regards to these evaluations that you do, obviously they involve individuals that are facing crimes, for the mitigation, extremely serious crimes, correct?
Yes.
And is it your practice to take the defendant and his word at face value, or are you interested in finding corroborating information as to the version of their events or the answers that they provide to your questions?
No, it makes sense to have other alternative information or collateral information, and I do not have that in this case. And I am aware of both stories and both defense and prosecution theories of this case.
In general, though, Doctor, when you're interviewing somebody who's facing aggravated murder charges, facing the potential of the death penalty, why don't you accept their word or their versions at face value?
Well, they're not always honest. I'm not a lie detector, but they've been manipulative in the past. They have a self-interest of their own story to be told.
Right. At that point, when you're interviewing them, these charges pending, they're going to want to paint themselves in a certain light, and they have a specific agenda most times to avoid the consequences of their actions. Is that fair to say?
I would agree with that. It's often common, yes.
And that's a concern that you would have. Do you recall when that would have occurred?
Sometime in 2015. I don't exactly remember when it was.
Would it have been early 2015? I believe, at least in your report, you first met with Mr. Ivery in April 2015, so can we safely assume that it was prior to that date?
Correct.
And the report that we've been referring to, that was issued, I believe, last Friday on October 16th. Is that also correct?
Yes.
I'm going to refer to some of the items now in that report. I guess first of all, you indicated that you did have the opportunity to view the video, the security video in this case. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Is it accurate that that is the extent of the police evidence or information that you had in this case?
Yes.
You did not have police reports, interviews with witnesses, anything else outside of those videos, is that correct?
I've had a number of conversations with Mr. Grevin, who reviewed my report before
Those videos, is that correct?
I've had a number of conversations with Mr. Grevin, who reviewed my report before it was submitted, and that review also included the account of my rendition of what happened in his self-report, and so we had discussions.
And in your report, you kind of have, everything is categorized. There's different categories pretty much based on the subject matter. For example, you have one category of sources of information, and then another category of background family history. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the background family history, you obtained that from Kenan and from his brother Marlon. Is that correct?
I did.
Did you speak with any other family members?
No, I attempted to, and I also attempted to obtain the mitigation specialist, like a type summary of his interviews with family that he did not produce.
In regards to your attempts to contact family, tell us about that, please.
I had called the mother and father on several occasions, and did not hear back. It should be emphasized that not all psychologists in mitigation cases contact family. I typically do. They did not respond to my phone calls, and I did talk to Marlon, and we spent some time together talking about the family history.
Were you aware, or did you know whether Kenan Ivery had a wife or a significant other or a longtime girlfriend?
Yes, I was aware that he had a girlfriend.
And her name is Kim Fisher. Did you talk to her and make attempts to speak with her during this process?
No, I did not.
You also have before I leave the background family history, I believe one of the statements or conclusions you make is that in regards to Kenan Ivery's childhood, that there was no child abuse, no abusive situations or trauma in his childhood. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Moving on to his employment history, what can you tell us about the information regarding his employment history that you obtained?
Sure. Reported that he was not working at the time of the offense. He was going to school with his brother at Ohio, and studying building maintenance. And he has a poor employment history, a number of odd jobs, no stable employment, most likely under the table type jobs. And again, was not employed at the time of the arrest.
Did you indicate he has a poor employment history?
I would say it's not positive.
And you did not have any employment records to review in this case?
I don't recall seeing it. I may be incorrect. I can look, but I don't recall seeing the records.
And you also indicated in the section entitled Employment History that he reported a history of drug trafficking. Can you tell us what he told you about that?
Well, he just said that he had sold some drugs on the street, I think more primarily marijuana, and he had done that for some period of time. I don't recall how long.
And in regards to some period of time, are you saying that He's saying it was for a short period of time, a long period of time.
I don't, you maybe have that information. I don't recall specifically, but I think it was, for some period of time, it wasn't like a week or two.
And Doctor, I think you told us about your experience, that it included being in Cook County Jail and having contact with numerous criminal defendants. And would it be fair to say that engaging in the field of drug trafficking, selling drugs, is a dangerous field to be involved in?
Yes, I would.
And would you agree with me that it would not be uncommon for those that are involved in the field of drug trafficking and selling drugs would have a gun or want a gun during those periods of time?
That would be true.
Would it also be true that individuals that are involved in the sale of drugs often can be victims of robberies or people coming at them with guns in order to steal the drugs or the drug money that those individuals might have?
That is true.
Now, you talked about a couple instances in Kenan Ivery's past in which he was allegedly robbed and burglarized. As far as corroboration in that case, I think you indicated that Marlon corroborated that?
Yeah, Marlon, had discussed both, the family's criminal involvement of brothers and the victimization or some of these experiences that Kenan had undergone as far as being held up and things like that.
As far as Marlon being present, though, Marlon was not present for any of these incidents, was he?
Not to my knowledge, I don't think so. He had explained what he had learned.
And I think there was a reference of a female being present for one of them. Did you have an opportunity to speak with that female?
I don't even know if he ever gave me that name. No, I did not.
And did you have any police reports, if police reports were made in regards to these incidents?
No, we had covered that earlier this morning on my testimony as a judge. I did not have those records. The defense lawyers did not either, to my knowledge.
Well, I'm not talking about Mr. Ivory's prior records. I'm talking about records of these incidents in which he claimed that he had been robbed at gunpoint as well as burglarized at gunpoint.
Oh, I'm sorry, Counselor. No, I did not have records. I think that there was a medical record from maybe 2005 from an incident following the incident he may have gone to the hospital.
And so you don't know if any of those incidents involved his drug trafficking or individuals that may have been interested in him because of being involved in drugs?
No, that's a good point. To my knowledge, from him and his brother, that was not the case, but I can't be certain. I wasn't there and there are no records.
You are aware, though, of Mr. Ivory's criminal background, that he was convicted in March of 1999 for possession of cocaine. Were you familiar with that?
Yes.
He was convicted in April of 2002 for possession of cocaine and tampering with evidence.
Yes.
In October of 2007, that he was convicted of trafficking in cocaine as well as possession of cocaine. Were you familiar with that?
Yes.
And so his statement to you that he only sold marijuana, being aware that he was convicted in October of 2007 of trafficking cocaine, that would be inconsistent with the version he gave you that it was just marijuana.
That may be. On page 4 of my report, I said he reported history of drug trafficking. I don't recall if he told me it was cocaine. I think it was mostly marijuana, so that may be my error, not his.
In regards to his drug abuse or his drug usage, he indicated, did he ever admit to using cocaine?
On page 5, he reported not using other illegal substances, and that would include, in my opinion, cocaine. So it was my understanding he used marijuana and alcohol.
So he had been using marijuana but denied using cocaine, that his convictions for possession of cocaine, either he's using them or he has them for some other purpose. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, Counselor.
And then finally, were you aware of his conviction in December of 2011, where he was convicted for the illegal assembly or possession of chemicals for the manufacturing of drugs, which was cocaine, as well as having weapons under disability?
Yes, I am.
And were you aware that the weapon that he had at that time was an Uzi submachine gun?
The attorney, Mr. Brevin, had informed me of that, yes.
You testified in regards to the testing that you conducted with
Yes.
Mr. Ivery. And if I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as this is your field, not mine, but there are two major tests that you presented to Mr. Ivery that deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is the one, and I'm looking at your report, and it just has the initials PAIs. Is that one of the reports?
No, so the personality assessment inventory, PAI, covers the gamut of mental health issues, including PTSD, which he scored significantly for, as well as, other areas of mental illness or mental health functioning, such as substance abuse, personality disorder, schizophrenia, etc.
So the PAI, when you indicate in your report that that from the PAI there was evidence of grandiosity, that's from the PAI test, is that correct?
Yeah, that is.
And doctor, when I look up the definition of grandiosity, I get grandiosity refers to an unrealistic sense of superiority, a sustained view of oneself as better than others that causes the narcissistic to view others with disdain or as inferior, as well as to a sense of uniqueness, the belief that few others have anything in common with oneself and that one can only be understood. Is that the definition we should take from your use of the word grandiosity, or does it have a different medical term?
Well, that, there's just going to be some items on the test. There's like 350 questions, so I don't know exactly what items cover grandiosity. I'm sure some of the terms or language you would use would be evident, but your definition does not completely overlap with the testing questions. But I think that there's going to be some, similarities in some of the questions. I think what you should know is that is in the bipolar disorder category. So it measures bipolar disorder with grandiosity being one area. I don't think he has bipolar disorder. And I did say in my direct that I thought Kenan was a bit, smug or grandiose at times. I don't think he has narcissistic personality disorder. And I think that grandiosity really overlaps an inaccuracy, which we often see.
In the paragraph in regards to that PAI test, you write at one point there was evidence of grandiosity, and then later he being Kenan, reports elevated and inconsistent mood with inflated self-esteem and grandiosity. You go on, he has evidence of insecurity and feelings of insecurity and self-doubt. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah, a lot of variability, a lot of that. He really, he's uncertain of himself, feels good and bad, and, it just depends probably on the situation as well. I mean, what's going on with him at the time.
And one of the tests for the presence of PTSD, would that be the PCL-5?
Yes, it is.
And you concluded, or you stated then at the top of page 6, while he reported symptoms of PTSD, he was below the threshold cutoff score that for research purposes the authors believe is relevant for a diagnosis of PTSD. Is that correct?
Yes, so this national association sponsored by the VA, Veterans Administration, has been using this because the DSM-5 is new. This is a newer test. It really should be used for a research basis, but it does correspond with the new DSM-5 symptoms. They've come out with a threshold cutoff for like the 17 items. He scored below that. And so he would be qualified as having traits of PTSD the potential disorder, could be, I guess, doubted from that particular test. But the detailed assessment of post-traumatic stress had more significant evidence and a threshold finding clearly of PTSD. That, coupled with the PAI, indicated to me 2 of the 3 tests significant, meeting the threshold clearly of PTSD.
But talking about the PCL-5, I mean, that's a test you chose to give Kenan Ivery, correct? You get to choose.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That was your decision
I know
to give that test, and at least for that test, it did not qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD. Is that, am I saying that accurately?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
Okay. When these tests are being given, and Kenan Ivery's answering these questions, I mean, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but he at this time is facing charges of aggravated murder, correct?
Yeah, that is correct.
And he's also facing the potential of sentences, and in this case, that potential sentence could include the death sentence when he's taking these tests, correct?
That is correct.
And there's also, he has a defense that he wants to present, and whatever that may be, that could also be a motivation as to how he answers questions.
That is very correct. I will say that the PAI and the detailed assessment of post-traumatic stress have validity scales on them. And those did not indicate he was portraying himself in a positive good light or a negative good light. So he's not, in my opinion, exaggerating symptoms of any mental illness, including PTSD. So I did, in my opinion, cover for that. But you raised a valid point.
And were you aware that in the trial phase of these proceedings that one of Mr. Ivory's claims was that he had a gun on him because of those robberies and because of his brother's death, as opposed to bringing the gun in with the intention of using it? Were you aware that that was one of the defenses in this case?
Yeah, I was aware that, that was said, and there was a self-defense claim, I believe.
And you referred to the DSM-5, that's kind of, once again, correct me if I'm not using the correct terminology, it's the handbook to diagnose mental illness. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in regards to the PTSD, it lists examples, and I believe you gave one, but it lists examples of circumstances of trauma that people experience, which has been found has been found in people who suffer from PTSD. And I'm going to go through those. One is an exposure to war as a combatant or a civilian. Is that correct?
Yes.
Threatened or actual?
Yes.
Threatened or actual sexual violence?
Yes.
Being kidnapped?
Yes.
Being taken hostage?
Correct.
Terrorist attack?
Yes.
Torture?
Correct.
Incarceration as a prisoner of war?
Yes.
Natural or human-made disasters?
Correct.
Some severe motor vehicle accidents?
Yes.
And threatened or actual physical assault?
Correct.
In regards to the end portion of your report, the forensic opinion, as well as the clinical impressions, although you talked about the testing show that there was this grandiosity that was reported from the testing, that nowhere appears in your conclusions in this case. Did you eliminate that as a possibility for the motivation of Kenan's conduct that day?
You're looking at one, I guess, a symptom on the PAI of many. I think that, when we don't, in the mental health professional, psychologists and psychiatrists, we don't need any testing to inform us for diagnosis. It's my choice to use it. And when I'm doing my interviews with him, I did not get a sense that this guy had like a full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. I think that there was some elevation on questions that pertain to grandiosity, but I had made mention of some antisocial personality characteristics that may be relevant. Now, whether the grandiosity would be combined with that or be relevant could be another issue. But I did not believe he had a narcissistic personality disorder.
In your clinical impressions, and I'm referring to page 9, you did include, or at least had the clinical impression, that he, being Kenan Ivery, has had problems with unlawful behaviors. He sold drugs and conned others. He has been irresponsible and has not worked steadily. He is likely impulsive and fails to plan ahead. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, one concern. No further questions.
Doctor, this is John Grevin again, okay?
Sure.
The prosecutor asked you in his cross-examination regarding the corroboration of Kenan's events of what happened and whether or not you talked to eyewitnesses. You would agree that you had a videotape of this incident, correct? Correct.
Yes.
You were able to view that videotape with Mr. Ivery, correct? Correct.
I did.
Okay. The prosecutor asked you if you were aware of Mr. Ivory's various convictions for various drug offenses, correct? Correct.
Yes.
To your knowledge, has Mr. Ivery ever been convicted of any prior crime of violence?
No.
Finally, the prosecutor talked to you about the difference in tests. And just so we're clear with the jury, the first test you give Mr. Ivery, and I can't remember what it's called, but that's the shorter test that on direct, I think you said had about 17 or 18 questions, correct?
Yeah, that's the post-traumatic checklist 5, so for the 5th edition of the DSM book.
And again, your testimony on cross was that when you give him that first, is it 17 or 20? I can't remember. How many questions are on it about?
Yeah, like no more than 20.
Okay. When you give him the 20-question test, he does not meet the threshold for post-traumatic stress disorder, but he clearly has indicators of post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that fair?
That is fair. That's accurate, yes.
And when you later give him another test for post-traumatic stress disorder that now has, I think you said, about 105 questions, that is much more intensive, you would agree that based on the results of that test, with a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, you diagnosed Kenan Ivery with post-traumatic stress disorder, correct?
Correct. That with the PTSD, or the personality assessment inquiry, that had elevations on the PTSD scale, okay, that were clinically significant. And based on my interviews, I mean, I don't have to do any testing, I can just ask him questions. And so I have to make a judgment at some point.
Right.
And I even said later on in my report, he likely has PTSD. So, you know, that's my opinion. The best I could do is seeing him on a number of occasions. He clearly has evidence of PTSD.
Now also, on cross-examination, the prosecutor seemed to imply that Kenan is smart enough that he could answer these test questions, the right ones correctly, to lead to a certain diagnosis. And you mentioned validity. Explain to the people on the jury what validity is, why validity is important, and how it impacts Kenan's taking these tests in this case.
Right, so the validity scales really measure whether you're being kind of an honest responder, whether you're faking good, like, hey, I've got no problems, I'm, got nothing wrong with me, and sometimes that's related to, in some cases, that they don't really take accountability for the offense at all. Nothing's wrong with me, I've got no psych problems, I shouldn't even be here. Then I've got other defendants which they fake back, and they what we call malinger, they exaggerate. they fake like they are hearing voices or have severe mental illness when they really don't. And so we have these scales, especially on the detailed assessment of post-traumatic stress and the personality assessment inventory, and his scales were not elevated. So he wasn't faking mentally ill, he wasn't denying problems. He seemed to be an honest respondent, and so that's what I have, okay?
So when you use the word malingering, basically that means faking. Is that fair?
Yes, faking a mental or neurological disorder for some type of benefit. So if you're in a car wreck and have a bump on your head, you're faking like you have no memory, and you may have an external gain of getting money in a lawsuit. Or if you're in a death penalty case, you may fake crazy or mentally ill in order to get off, let's say, to be found insane. And there was none of that going on.
Okay, and in fact, in your report, you put that you found no evidence of malingering. Fair?
Yeah, he was not faking mental illness or anything like that.
Okay. The prosecutor went over your website and the various things that are on your website about what you're trying to do. You would agree with me, I think, that every capital case is different, correct?
Yes.
Every case is different, correct?
Yeah, I've done hundreds of them. Yes, there's similar themes.
Correct.
But yes, I mean, every defendant is different.
In fact, the case that you and I worked on last summer in Judge Rowland's court, completely different than the issues in this case, correct?
There were there's a couple similarities, a lot of differences, yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me that it's your job, when you present this report, I mean, let's be honest, you talked about him being grandiose, having an alcohol problem, a marijuana problem, antisocial, anti-personality, social disorder, whatever. I mean, when you give this report, you give it, frankly, warts and all, don't you?
I do. I mean, I know that the adversarial nature of this process tries to, put me in good and bad lights. The bottom line is what I testified to. This defendant has mental and psychiatric issues that cut both ways. And this is how I call it, how I see it.
Thank you, Doctor.
No further questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Fabian. We're going to end that connection, and we're going to take a break here, ladies and gentlemen. And so it is
Thank you.
11:10 a.m. We're going to take a 20-minute break, and we're going to convene in the other courtroom, okay? And we're going to add some chairs if all of you are coming over there, because we want to make sure everyone has a seat. And the jury is going to be taken now by Shay back into the jury room in the other courtroom, and then she'll give you your break. Remind you of all the admonitions. You're not to discuss this case, permit anyone to discuss it with you or in your presence. Don't investigate this case in any fashion. Don't make any final decisions until you've heard all the evidence. And don't have any conversations with anyone who's involved in the process or present in the courtroom. Because I lost my microphone. Sorry. All right, so we're going to now break until 11:30 back in my courtroom. All right?
Judge, we talk scheduling real fast, so we know what's going to happen.
I'm guessing what's going to happen.
Well, I just want to do this. I don't think I should get a candy bar now or just wait. I mean, yeah. Well, half hour at most. Yeah. Basically, that's like 5 minutes. You're short. The break lunch.
Whole board.
you do?